We are Campus Attic, by fans, for fans, and let us never forget that one game where Josh Wilcox fell backwards on his ass out of his three-point stance.
That's Josh Wilcox that fell on his wallet. The count was so long and Josh was just drifting.
Today we're going back in time to a time when Autzen Stadium wasn't a thing. Where did Oregon football play before there was such a thing as Autzen? We're going to find out. Football wasn't the first sport played at Oregon. That was actually baseball in 1877. But football is quite a legacy nonetheless. When the first Oregon football team was organized in 1893, the university was just a collection of buildings outside of Eugene City in the middle of a treeless cow pasture. March 24th, 1894 was the first game. A 44-2 romp for Oregon over Albany College, from Albany, Oregon, played in an open field at the corner of Kincaid and 13th, where the Lillis Business Center stands today. The site became known as Athletics Field, an all-purpose open field for all athletic activities for UO students, and it remained in use as a site for track, football, and even horse and auto races up until 1903. That's when the university bought land on the opposite side of 13th Ave and built the first real football field, Kincaid Field. Kincaid Field was built largely by students, complete with bleachers and a roof. Kincaid was the site of Oregon's glory years. In the mid-teens, led by the legendary coach Hugo Bezdek, Oregon became the premier football program west of the Mississippi, including a trip to the 1917 East-West tournament game played in Pasadena, the precursor to the Rose Bowl. During football season, Kincaid Field was a little more than a giant mud bog with bleachers for fans to watch the slop, the worst of it probably being the 1917 Washington game, where Oregon and UW battled to a 0-0 tie. It was a game that was so gridlocked by field conditions that at one point the ball was actually lost in the mud, like buried in the mud, and one player nearly drowned at the bottom of the pile. UW hadn't lost a single game in years, but in nearly knee-deep mud, nobody was moving the ball. With other schools building large stadiums and Oregon's prominent place in the game, it was evident a better facility was needed. In 1918, construction of a new, bigger, better stadium began on an open land east of the Pioneer Cemetery. Ready by mid-year for the 1919 season, a year when Oregon would return to the East-West tournament game, later known as the Rose Bowl. The new stadium had no name, but was a massive upgrade from Kincaid Field's mud bog. At the 1919 Civil War football game, a halftime ceremony was planned to name the new stadium after longtime track and football trainer Bill Hayward. The school's administration took to the field to give speeches and honor Coach Hayward, but there was one problem. As the ceremony began, no Coach Hayward. Nobody had bothered to inform the coach that the new field was being named in his honor, so he was tending to duties in the locker room, treating players in preparation for the second half. The ceremony went on with no coach, and the second half followed. Bill Hayward would not find out that the new stadium was now known as Hayward Field until the next morning, when he read it in the newspaper. Hayward Field had replaced Kincaid Field for varsity football, but Kincaid was still useful. It remained a site for freshman football and other sports, but when a track was built around Hayward, enabling the new stadium for multiple sports, Kincaid's time was finally done. In 1922, Kincaid Field was torn down, and the space it once occupied became an open quad dedicated to those students who had died fighting in World War I, the Memorial Quad. Today, in the area between Johnson Hall, Chapman Hall, and Condon Hall, sits the Memorial Quad, an area where Oregon football fought for years. There's a small plaque northwest of the Museum of Art marking the site where Kincaid Field once stood. Hayward Field, meanwhile, flourished as both a football and track and field facility. Hayward was expanded in the mid-1920s with west grandstands, rows of lights were added, and the track was expanded. Multiple renovations were made over the years, but by the 1950s, Hayward Field was showing its age for football. For years, Oregon coach Len Casanova sold the Oregon program to recruits on the promise of a new stadium, and early designs even included a drive-in parking for the end zones for fans to watch the games from their cars. Over a decade would pass before Coach Cas would finally get his new stadium, and he would never actually get to coach at it. When the Oregon football team officially moved in 1967 from Hayward to the new stadium across the river known as Autzen Stadium, Kaz handed the reins of the team he had coached since 1951 over, and he assumed an administrative role at Oregon. His offensive coordinator, Jerry Fry, became the new head coach. Autzen, too, has gone through many changes over the years. A stadium that originally had a grass field has been expanded, gutted, reworked, and molded into the shimmering example it is today as one of the best places in the world to watch a football game. It's quite a step forward from Oregon's inauspicious beginnings, first on Athletics Field, then the mud bog of Kincaid Field, to the dirt field of Hayward, which didn't get a proper grass turf until 1937, to the early days of Autzen Stadium, to what Autzen has become now. Throughout all the different locations, though, one thing has remained constant. There's nothing like a football game at the University of Oregon. Till next time, it's always game day.